The 1960s era wasn't just about style. It was about settling scores at over 200 miles per hour. And in that time, Ferrari ruled endurance racing. But Ford wasn't about to stay in the shadows. So they came up with the 427 side oiler, a monstrous 7.0-liter V8 built not for the showroom but for one purpose: to crush Maranello's streak at Le Mans. This wasn't theory. It was brute force turned into history with an engine that could pound away hour after hour while others broke. So if you want to know how the side oiler shook Ferrari to its core, hit the like and subscribe for updates.
And hype this video if you're ready to take it to the next level.
A better way to oil. Ask any hardcore racing fan about legendary V8s, and the Ford 427 side oiler will always pop up. But what made it so special? In 1963, Ford launched the FE427, but the first version had a top oiler design. That meant the oil went to the camshaft first, leaving the crankshaft, the part that took the hardest beating, waiting. Under extreme racing stress, that spelt trouble. By 1965, Ford engineers changed the game with the side oiler. Now, oil went directly to the crank first, keeping it alive under the kind of punishment endurance racing demanded. The numbers speak for themselves. In street trim, the 427 side oiler with a single 4-barrel carb cranked out 410 horsepower and 476 pound-feet of torque. Add dual quads and it hits 425 horsepower with 480 pound-feet of torques. And then came the monster, the 427 SOHC Cammer. This was Ford flexing: 616 horsepower with a single carb and an insane 657 horsepower at 7,500 RPM when fitted with dual carbs. That wasn't just quick, it was dominance on wheels. But it wasn't about dyno charts alone. This engine became the beating heart of the Ford GT40 program. At Le Mans in 1966, Ferrari had been untouchable for 6 years straight. Enter the 427 side oiler. That year, Ford didn't just win, it delivered a 1-2-3 finish, humiliating Ferrari on the biggest endurance stage in the world. The side oiler wasn't just powering cars, it was rewriting history. So why does everyone still talk about it? Because this wasn't just another big V8, it was the hammer Ford used to smash Ferrari's crown. Think that's wild? Wait until you hear how this engine transformed the GT40 into a Ferrari killer machine. The fix: engineering for endurance. Bolting a big engine into a car doesn't guarantee victory, and Ford knew it. The 427 side oiler was powerful, but endurance racing wasn't about short bursts of speed. It was about lasting a brutal 24 hours. To beat Ferrari at Le Mans, Ford had to make this engine tough, efficient, and nearly indestructible. The first step was fixing a weakness. Early FE engines were top oilers, meaning the camshaft got priority before the crankshaft. That worked fine for street and drag racing, but at 6,000 plus RPM for hours on end, it was a recipe for blown cranks. In 1965, Ford rolled out the side oiler, which sent oil to the crank and main bearings first. That change alone made the 427 survive punishment that other V8s couldn't dream of handling. Weight was another battle. A stock 427 was heavy, so Ford trimmed it down with aluminum heads, intake manifold, and water pump. Even the oil pan got swapped for magnesium. These changes stripped around 130 pounds off the engine, making the GT40 lighter and sharper on track. Then came lubrication. Ford used a dry sump oil system with twin pumps, one for pressure, one to scavenge oil, keeping every part fed with oil through long, high-G corners. And don't forget the wild exhaust headers. Nicknamed the bundle of snakes, these crisscrossed pipes balanced flow between cylinder banks, helping the engine breathe better and rev clean to its 6,400 RPM redline. The result? An engine that didn't just have muscle but could hold that muscle flat out for hours. That's why in 1966, the GT40 with its tuned 427 side oiler didn't just win Le Mans. It dominated with a historic 1-2-3 finish, crushing Ferrari's 6-year streak. Durability plus power. That was Ford's secret weapon. Engineering a lightweight chassis. The 427 side oiler wasn't just powerful, it was a beast that demanded an entirely different kind of chassis. Ferrari's high-revving V12s were lighter and more nimble, so if Ford wanted its thunderous V8 to deliver, it had to build a platform that could handle all that muscle without turning into dead weight. The GT40 Mk2, which carried the side oiler, came in at about 2,670 pounds. 1,212 kilograms. Not bad for a car with a 7.0-liter engine under the rear deck. The secret was its steel monocoque chassis, supported by subframes and wrapped in fiberglass body panels. Strong, rigid, and still lighter than Ferrari expected, but Ford wasn't satisfied. Enter Allen Man Racing, Ford's UK partner, who built special lightweight GT40s. Instead of fiberglass, they used paper-thin aluminum panels, just 0.030 inches thick. They even removed rocker sill covers, exposing reinforcing ribs. This ruthless diet dropped the car's weight to about 2,160 pounds, a 500-pound lighter than the MK2. And then came the game changer, the GT40 MK4, better known as the J car. This wasn't just a car, it was aerospace engineering on wheels. Built with an aluminum honeycomb tub, the chassis alone weighed only 86 pounds. The whole car tipped the scales at around 2,660 pounds, about 300 pounds lighter than the MK2 despite carrying the same brutal side-oiler V8. Why did all this matter? Because weight is the enemy in endurance racing. Every pound lost meant quicker acceleration, sharper handling, less tire strain, and better efficiency. By lightening the GT40, Ford unleashed the full fury of the 427 side-oiler and gave Ferrari's sleek V12s a fight they couldn't win. Counteracting aerodynamic lift, drop the 427 side-oiler into the GT40 and suddenly you don't just have speed, you've got chaos. At 200 miles per hour, the car wasn't hugging the track, it was practically trying to lift off. That raised the big question. How do you keep a 7.0-liter monster stable when Ferrari's smaller V12s already had an aerodynamic edge? The numbers showed the danger. At 150 miles per hour, the GT40 MK2 generated about 100 pounds of lift with 525 pounds of drag. Push it to 200 miles per hour and those figures jumped to 177 pounds of lift and nearly 933 pounds of drag. That much lift made the car unpredictable in braking zones and corners. Exactly where Ferrari could have pounced during a 24-hour race. Ford's engineers knew they had to fight the air itself. Their first move was cutting 9 inches off the front nose, shifting the center of pressure forward and trimming 19 pounds in the process. Suddenly, the front end settled, and the ungainly rear fins became unnecessary. Then came the clever addition of a rear adjustable spoiler, only 1.5 to 3 inches tall. Small? Yes, but it gave drivers control over downforce, letting them tune the car for different conditions. The result? The GT40, powered by the brutal torque of the side-oiler, now stayed firmly planted at high speed. Drivers could brake later, accelerate earlier, and corner with confidence. Ferrari's lighter V12 machines may have been quick, but they couldn't match that stability over 24 hours. Think horsepower alone won Ford the fight? Not quite. The side-oiler forced Ford to master aerodynamics, and that perfect mix of power and control is what left Ferrari in the dust. Engineering faster pit stops and smarter cooling. The 427 side-oiler gave Ford the kind of muscle Ferrari had no answer for. But endurance racing isn't about winning a single lap, it's about surviving thousands of them. That raised a critical question. How do you keep a 7.0-liter beast alive for 24 relentless hours when every pound of torque head was hammering brakes, straining cooling systems, and threatening to break the car apart? Ford's solution was to rethink the pit strategy. In the 1960s, swapping brakes in the middle of a race was a nightmare. Mechanics had to pull pieces apart, bleed fluid, and hope nothing went wrong. Too slow, too risky. But the side-oiler's brutal power left no choice but to innovate. Ford's answer was pre-assembled brake hub and rotor units. Entire systems, rotors, calipers, and fluid, were built in advance. In the pits, mechanics could rip out the old setup and slide in the new one like changing a wheel. No bleeding, no fumbling, no wasted minutes. Suddenly, Ford had pit stops that were faster, cleaner, and far more reliable than anything Ferrari could match. Then came the heat problem. The side-oiler's torque meant drivers leaned hard on the brakes, and heat built up fast. Left unchecked, rotors warped, pads faded, and races were lost. Ford's Shelby and Holman Moody crews attacked this with custom brake ducting systems. Scoops were routed to deliver cool air, often from behind the radiator, directly onto the glowing rotors. That constant airflow kept temperatures under control, preserved stopping power, and let drivers push lap after lap without fear of failure. Think about what that meant. Ferrari's drivers had to manage their cars, careful not to overstress fragile components. Ford's GT40s, powered by the side oiler, could run flat out and still come in for pit service quicker than anyone else. So was victory just about horsepower? Not even close. The 427 side oiler forced Ford to innovate in the pits and on the track, and those smart solutions turned raw power into a 24-hour weapon Ferrari simply couldn't counter. How did the 427 side oiler demand a cockpit that made drivers work smarter at Le Mans? What's it like sitting in a car with a 7.0-liter side oiler roaring behind your head at nearly 200 miles per hour? The truth is, the cockpit of the GT40 wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. This engine was so brutal that Ford had to redesign the driver's space to handle the constant punishment of endurance racing. The tachometer was the star of the dashboard. Positioned right in the middle behind the three-spoke steering wheel, it gave drivers one piece of critical information: revs. With the side oiler's torque, missing a shift wasn't just costly, it could blow the engine. Supporting gauges, oil pressure, water temperature, fuel, and others sat close by in a clean arc so the driver could check them at a glance. Time-wasted scanning meant time lost to Ferrari. Switches were equally purposeful. Instead of fancy finishes or extra features, the GT40 used simple toggles for ignition, oil pumps, and electrics. They were rugged, mechanical, and designed to be flicked without hesitation, even in the middle of the night. Nothing inside this cockpit was about luxury. It was about staying alive and staying fast. The driving position itself was cramped. The GT40 was low, narrow, and difficult to climb into. Once seated, drivers were strapped into fixed-back bucket seats, lined with fire-resistant material and ventilation holes. Steel floors beneath their feet reminded them this was no road car, it was a weapon built for Le Mans. So why such Spartan design? Because the 427 side oiler didn't give drivers room for error. The cockpit had to keep them laser-focused and able to react instantly. Ferrari might have built cars that were lighter and more refined inside, but Ford gave their drivers the tools to tame the most brutal V8 on the grid. This wasn't comfort. This was control that Ferrari couldn't match. How did the 427 side oiler prove its reliability and force Ferrari to watch in awe? There's an old saying in racing: horsepower wins the straights, but reliability wins the race. The 427 side oiler proved that to be true in the most brutal way possible, by outlasting Ferrari's fragile V12s when it mattered most. The turning point came in 1966. Ford's GT40 Mk2, armed with the side oiler, didn't just win, it dominated. At the 24 Hours of Le Mans, Ford finished first, second, and third, delivering the company's first ever win at the event. Ferrari, which had ruled Le Mans for years, watched its cars fade away as the American V8s thundered on without mercy. But Ford didn't stop there. In 1967, the GT40 Mk4, again powered by the side oiler, took victory with drivers Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt behind the wheel. It was an all-American car, an all-American team, and another crushing blow to Ferrari, whose entries could not survive the relentless pace. 2 years, 2 massive statements. So why was the side oiler so reliable? The answer was in its engineering. Earlier, FE engines suffered oil starvation at high RPMs, a fatal flaw in endurance racing. The side oiler fixed this by sending oil to the crankshaft first, keeping the main bearings alive even under extreme stress. Add in cross-bolted main caps and beefier block webs, and you had an engine built to take punishment that Ferrari's V12s simply couldn't handle. Now think about it. Ferrari brought elegance, precision, and high-revving engines to the fight. Ford brought a hammer. But this wasn't a hammer that broke after a few swings. It was one that kept pounding hour after hour. That's the difference the side oiler made. It wasn't just fast, it was unkillable. And at Le Mans, that's what crushed Ferrari. How much punch? Did the 427 side oiler really pack, and why did it shake Ferrari to the core? Numbers don't lie, and when you see the stats behind Ford's 427 side oiler, you start to understand why Ferrari's engineers were losing sleep in the 1960s. Let's start with torque, because that's where this engine flexed hardest. In dual quad street form, the side oiler was rated at around 480 pound-feet. That's serious pulling power, enough to slam drivers back in their seats and keep them there. But the race-prepped versions weren't bound by factory ratings. On the dyno, even near-stock builds were hitting 485 horsepower at 6,400 RPM and 475 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM. Those weren't inflated marketing claims, those were real, verified test numbers. And here's where it gets wild. With magnesium induction and lightweight heads, builders have pushed the side oiler to 510 horsepower and over 500 pound-feet of torques. For a naturally aspirated V8 from the mid-60s, that was staggering. Ferrari's V12s had elegance and revs, sure, but they simply couldn't match that kind of low-end muscle. So what did that mean on track? The side oiler gave Ford explosive acceleration out of corners, relentless mid-range power on straights, and enough stamina to keep doing it hour after hour. Ferrari's engines had to dance at high RPMs to stay competitive, but that delicate balance often led to failures under Le Mans' punishing conditions. Ford's brute force just kept pounding. Here's the question to ask. When one car can surge ahead without stressing its limits, and the other is constantly flirting with mechanical disaster, who do you think lasts 24 hours? That's the punchline of the 427 side oiler. It wasn't only about headline horsepower, it was about dependable, crushing torque that Ferrari simply had no way to counter. How much real muscle did the 427 side oiler pack, and why did that scare Ferrari? The 427 side oiler wasn't just a big block, it was a statement. On paper, early versions with dual 4-barrel carbs were rated at around 390 horsepower and 390 pound-feet of torque. Respectable, but those were conservative numbers. The real story came when engines hit the dyno. Period-correct builds regularly pushed over 500 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque without exotic modifications. Some test runs even logged 510 horsepower, staggering for a naturally aspirated engine in the 1960s. And when builders experimented with forced induction, the same block unleashed 650-plus horsepower, an almost unthinkable figure for its day. What made this terrifying for Ferrari? The torque curve. Ferrari's V12s lived at high RPMs, delicate and temperamental. The side oiler, by contrast, shoved out massive torque low in the band, giving Ford explosive acceleration out of corners and unrelenting power on straights. So, was the Ferrari V12 elegant? Sure. But elegance doesn't help when the guy next to you has 500 horsepower of dependable American muscle, pushing him forward every lap. That's why the 427 side oiler wasn't just powerful, it was intimidating. How did the 427 side oiler rewrite the racing rulebook and redefine Ford's legacy? The 427 side oiler wasn't just an engine, it was a force so disruptive that racing had to change around it. After Ford's GT40s dominated Le Mans in 1966 with a historic 1-2-3 finish, and then returned in 1967 with another crushing victory, officials stepped in. New rules capped prototypes at 3.0 liters, effectively outlawing Ford's 7.0-liter hammer. That wasn't a coincidence, it was the sport's only way to slow the Americans down. Think about that for a second. Ferrari had ruled Le Mans for 6 straight years. Then Ford shows up, powered by the side oiler, and not only breaks the streak but forces regulators to rewrite the book. That's impact, and the reach went beyond endurance racing. The same engine made headlines in the Shelby Cobra and shocked drag racing crowds when it stood toe-to-toe with Chrysler's mighty Hemi. Everywhere the side oiler showed up, it reshaped the battlefield. So, was it just raw power? Number. It was a game-changer that proved brute strength, when built smart, could topple finesse. The 427 side oiler didn't just win, it forced the world to play by new rules. From Ford's thundering 427 side oiler to the way it crushed Ferrari at Le Mans, this was how raw American muscle rewrote racing history. This wasn't a story of delicate engines or polished luxury. It was about brute force, smart engineering, and endurance that couldn't be broken. Ferrari's reign collapsed under the weight of Ford's V8, and motorsport itself had to change the rules to keep up. Some called it unfair, others called it unstoppable, but no one could deny its impact. So if you could relive that golden era, would you rather drive precision or pure power? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next ride.